Oh, it does record like that. Okay. Sorry, it's a new phone. I don't know what I'm doing with it yet. Oh, nope, that's bad. That'd be a little better? A little worse? No? Okay. So, I was thinking, I saw a couple things, and as I'm just sort of going through some of the little research and things that I do and watch and read and everything, a lot of talk about nothing. Not, oh, somewhat much ado about nothing. Excellent play. And a lot of it has to do with, I really think this is where language gets funky. Because if we're talking about English, nothing usually means just sort of it's gone. There's nothing, no thing. It's just sort of blank void, maybe even empty. But the thing with that is that empty actually also implies that it can be full. A jar or cup can be empty, but those can also be full. A bladder can be empty, but it could also be filled. I'm a little evocative, I know. But usually, in philosophical terms, especially if we're going to talk about stuff like maybe Buddhism or Taoism or some of these other things, even I would imagine probably getting into Gnosticism, and then if you're into sort of occult things and some other modes of thought and mythologies that might be considered sort of heathen or pagan or anything like that, nothing, break it down further, no thing. There's not a separation any longer. There's no longer a difference or between things, or there's no longer boundaries. There's no longer a you and I. There's no longer a tree is this tree over here, and that loud ass airplane is that loud ass airplane, which is different than my car. And do you mind? Seriously, it's just rude. So the idea of nothing then is the lack thereof then of that separation. So if they say think about nothing, bring your mind into nothing, that doesn't mean just blankness. There's a lot of misnomers out there of people with meditative practice. Oh, you're not supposed to think about anything. Well, that's not going to happen. The idea is that you do not then attach to anything. You do not become now, oh, this thought comes into my head and then I have to go pay attention to it. You're getting to the point where those thoughts then all sort of merge back into a larger sort of thing. I had an experience doing the sensory deprivation meditations where it was almost like I was sort of floating along something like this river thing here. And as I went, it was almost like I could see like boundaries between concepts and thoughts. And then as I went further along those concepts and thoughts, the boundaries grew bigger and the concepts and thoughts became less concrete. And then the further I went on, there was only like a couple things. And then this one sort of massive, all connected, if you kind of get spat out into like a lake or something like that, or the ocean, where everything is just sort of all is existing as one sort of unified thing. That's what we're talking about, nothing. That's what's meant about now no thing. You know, not just, oh, I just blanked out, didn't think anything. That's not it. Void is not nothing. And, pretty much I have a whole sort of idea and take that all sort of mythologies that have a creation theory that start with everything was sort of an undifferentiated whole. So everything from the Chinese to different indigenous populations to the Norse and Egypt with all 4 creation theories or more that they have, where the waters of chaos were like the first thing, and then a thing came out of that, and then things get more specified as things go down. the sort of Taoist way to think about it is almost like it's almost more scientific. You have Wuji, which is that undifferentiated whole, that nothing. Then you have Taiji, which is where we're getting Taiji Chuan for not Tai Chi, as in, oh, it's you move your chi. That's not what it means. You use Qigong energy work in Taiji, but it doesn't mean Tai Chi as in Chi is that energy. It means grand ultimate. That Taiji is that like singular thing in the nothing that then breaks down into yin and yang. And then yin and yang breaks down into greater yin and greater yang and lesser yin and lesser yang. And then we have the 5 elements. Then we have the 8 trigrams, and then the 64 hexagrams, and then the quote-unquote 10,000 things. 10,000 things in this instance just means everything that is. And the idea then, and I think the reason for the mythologies being so similar is almost like we're talking about again now esoteric schools and philosophies and magics and all that other stuff then being hidden in that mythology, in that religion, in that spirituality, in those myths. Because now it's like, okay, I take those 10,000 things and then I learn how to kind of get rid of them and move back up almost conceptually. So you move from everything in the world and then you focus on like the I Ching, those 64 hexagrams. And then you start learning, you start breaking those sort of boundaries away, and now it's just like the 8 trigrams, which are higher, larger conceptual things than the 5 elements. And then you break away from that, and eventually you just get into understanding and existing and just yin and yang, and then yin and yang solidify into the Taiji, and eventually that dissipates as well, and you're left with that one thing, the Tao, the Wuji. If you want to call it God, you want to call it heaven, you want to call it the force, whatever it is, you want to call it, you just want to call it the universe. I mean, it's the same thing as if you are into the religion of science, because let's face it, a lot of scientists, a lot of things have turned science into a religion that, we have everything in the universe, and then you get and you understand, you truly understand with like your being, now everything kind of going back, you break up into the elements. And then those elements have the things about them that are similar. And then you understand with your consciousness those things with that. And then you get back into even further away and space and time and dark matter and energy or these other things. And then eventually, Terence McKenna used to say the Big Bang is the limit break of credulousness for science. We're supposed to believe that everything in the entire universe was in one singularity, one infinitely dense sort of singularity. Well, that sort of thing, and even beyond that, is now what we're talking about before going in terms of consciousness. So I'm not talking about whether or not you think consciousness is derived in the brain or the brain is a receiver of consciousness. That's a whole different discussion. But in terms of conceptually, in terms of nothing or no thing, and in terms of making that consciousness then being able to get there and reach there, there's been other descriptions of sort of, meditation and working on consciousness, and I think even Alan Watts was talking about that before. You when you're able to kind of really lock in and get to that, you pull a little bit of that sort of grace down and then, integrate that in you, but you're not going to be, a superhuman instant Buddha if you have a really good meditation session once or twice. You have to kind of keep going to that well, and every time you do and you bring a little bit back, you get a little more, you get a little more, and you get a little more, which is kind of what we're, while you meditate every day or pray every day or whatever your practice might be. And that's sort of the reason for it. And it's to get to understanding on a fundamental level, not just you can write out a theorem for nothing or be able to just define it in some sort of materialist, reductionist way, but actually as a being and as a consciousness, being able to then experience nothing as it were, because it is the illusion of separation between the consciousness and everything else is then gone. And that's, whether it's being in touch with the universe or the mind of God or the Tao or, whatever might be underlying, whatever your philosophy or religion or spiritual practice or anything might be, that's kind of it. That's kind of the thing for a lot of people. And then, yeah, you might touch in that once or twice, and, you might do something for 20 years and touch it a couple times. And then maybe after 30, 40 years, it gets a little easier, and maybe 4 or 5 times in that time. It's not going to be something that you can just turn on and off. And kind of nor should it be. This is now, you start getting into almost alchemy and things with that in it too, and why sort of truths and practices and things like that were hidden in things like scriptures, in things like mythologies, and in sort of weird coded things, and with hidden masters who would teach stuff in certain ways, because it's meant to be worked on. You can't. This is not something to really. If we're really going to talk about nothing, it's not something that I can or anyone can just sort of go beep on a button and you get it. You have to be able to break all these other boundaries and illusions and separations down in your own consciousness and in your own self to be able to then experience it. You can use as many words as you can to try to describe it as best you can, but it won't convey what nothing is unless the person you're talking to has experienced it as well. And at that point in time, you really don't need to say anything. You really shouldn't have to say anything. It's pretty much that's weird, you both just sort of go like with it, because you can't say anything about it. Because saying something about it now brings in things. You bring in boundaries, you bring in separation, you bring in things, and therefore it is no longer nothing, no thing. Okay, so I rambled on about nothing, literally, for almost 15 minutes. So on that note, thank you for listening and watching, and the idea is to at least help or at least do no harm. So hopefully this has done at least one of those things. Ciao.